it will be interesting to see if those are ever adjusted, because I think we're in a trend here that is to stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good luck getting all that nitrogen on too. That's going to be your biggest bottleneck down your way. So.
Yeah, big trend, big switch this year. It seems like to liquid over anhydrous. I don't know if I don't think economics was the primary driving force in it. I think economics was, but it didn't come from the price of fertilizer. I think it really came from the results that people are seeing in the field. So a lot of people have gone to split application, which makes that much more difficult. Well,
yeah,
Christy,
good luck
we're
getting
pretty
the retailers
close.
to catch up. So yeah.
Yeah, Christy, we're pretty close.
Yep.
Do you want to go ahead and officially kick us off and hit the record button? And then I will wait until right at 9, but get started meat and potatoes.
Because we still have quite a few people really clicking on here. I mean, I'm getting messages, so I don't want you to officially start until 9. But I do want to go ahead and just welcome everyone to today's ASNA Edge April marketing meeting. We do have a full hour full of information for you, so be sure to stay tuned all day or for the full hour. It's great to see some new faces. We have a lot of new people joining us today. So just a few housekeeping things. If you have any questions, please share those in our chat or question box. Be happy to answer those for you as they come in. You can always send questions to us at marketinginfo@sompointernational.com, and I will have that in the chat and the question box, so you can ask those throughout the day or anytime, actually, if you have any questions. And you can always send those to us anytime, not just today, but anytime you have a question. We do have with us today Brooks York, who is our Director of Producer Services. We have Sterling Smith, who is our Director of Ag Research, and Mike Toohill, who is our Corporate Agronomist. So we'll have that formality out of the way, and we can go ahead at 9 o'clock and get us started.
Perfect. Well, we've got great representation across the country. I see North Dakota's popped on. I see Ohio's popped on. We've probably got 16 states of listeners right now with the attendees we've got so far, and they continue to come in, so that's a good thing. This meeting today, and I wanted to focus on something we sometimes take for granted, some of the things that we say in regards to marketing and crop insurance, and we make some generalities. And so today I really wanted to cover a lot of that. I'll give everybody just a few more seconds to pop on. Christy, you give me the thumbs up whenever we are ready to go.
I will, but we have a lot of people still joining. So give us just a moment. We might wait till even like 9:01 just to, because like we just had 10 people join in the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, we'll hold off here just a little bit. While we're hopping off there, use the chat button, and if you don't care, I'm just curious if there's been planting in your area. So if there's been planting in your area, chat back yes, and kind of where you're from. Don't have to give much detail, but just curious. I see the Delmarva Peninsula out there. It looks like maybe planters rolling here in the next few days. So we got that reply in early, but I can tell you here in Illinois, everybody's setting on go. And the second we see some dry weather, there's going to be a lot of crop planted, very little bit. Northeast Iowa, we got a yes for planters rolling. Surprising me a little bit with that. So that's a good surprise. It will be interesting to see where we're getting stuff done. I would assume Kansas has seen some the planter activity. Oklahoma's seen some planter activity with being a bit drier down there. I talked to a farmer yesterday down in the Delta, and way behind pace. They've got corn and beans in the field, but far behind what they would like to be, and they're just looking for that window to try to get in. And I think they're going to pull the planting marathon, and try to get finished up. Christy, I got 9:01 on here. What do you think? Go time?
I know you are anxious to go. I do not blame you, and I know we have a lot of information. I do want to remind you all that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you do miss, we will have this for you in an upcoming DMO and on our YouTube page. So I say let's get started because we do have an awful lot of information.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here, and I'm going to be as useful with your time as I possibly can be. And we're going to zip through this. I like to start off with kind of telling you what we're going to talk about, talking about it, and then passing the baton. How we're going to do this today is I'm going to go first on some issues that involve crop insurance and marketing. Mike's going to pop in. He's going to tell us about what's going on in the world of agronomy. Sterling's going to take us away with that information you need to know about what's going on in the markets in general. Before I get started, I want to remind everybody of this. We're making some changes. They're good changes in how we communicate information to you. The daily call that you get, some of you may have noticed that 10 a.m. call, 10 a.m. Central call, you're also getting that accompanied with a text. That text message is essentially going to tell you exactly what's on that call. It's important that you click on that. I like that a little bit better in my world because I can open it at my leisure. So if you get that text, don't delete it. Know what it is. We've also got 3 podcasts that are out on a day-to-day basis. We'll probably have a 4th one in the next couple of weeks. But on a day-to-day basis, so Sterling puts out a 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. ASNA Edge market brief, just going over the markets. At 10:15, we've got the livestock market brief. Easy peasy once you're set up. Podcasts scare a lot of people, but once you're set up in this podcast, I think you're going to like it. It's pretty convenient to get to. One click and you're there. Having said that, if you got some questions on that, email is down at the bottom, marketinginfo@sompointl.com. Any questions, shoot them our way. So let's get started. For years and years, we've heard how crop insurance and marketing work hand in hand. We take for granted a lot of times our meetings of how this works, and how easy it is, and how it's just like this perfect fit. And sometimes we don't stop and explain things maybe as much as we should. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to cover these questions. Number one, is marketing still important with this runaway market? Everybody thinks this market's going higher. I'm bullish. Sterling somewhat bullish. The whole free world is bullish, but the whole free world can be wrong on occasion. So we're going to talk about why it's still important in a market that even seems like it's unstoppable. The second one we're going to do is in these meetings over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've really cautioned on futures-only contracts because we have to set basis. Our producers or our farmers have to set basis, and we put some warning signs out there. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. We've tiptoed around the idea of buying put options. Are they still valid in this kind of market? We're going to talk about those very quickly. And then here's the kicker. Okay, this is where we come in. This is where ASNA comes in. In the event I can't fulfill my obligation, does crop insurance have my back? Does it protect me? We're going to talk about that. And then here's the last thing, and it's the Achilles heel. Is there anything that can hinder my crop insurance ability to protect me from canceling contracts? So here's what we're looking for. We're going to look at holes in our various policies. What could go wrong? Where does our policy maybe not protect us like we've been told it does? We're going to talk about those things over the next 20 minutes. We'll go ahead and get started. Is marketing my crop still important? I think it's probably more important than it's ever been, and I'm going to explain this. We're in this world right now where we are dealing with a tremendous number of dollars per acre when it comes to inputs into our crop. You guys have seen this listing before. This is a rundown of corn in my area. Mike, you're on here. You look at these. I want you to be critical of this, but on corn, I've got fertilizer with application at $408 an acre. Now, there's a lot of people on this call that don't believe that number's right. They think I've probably inflated that number to get that wow factor. Is that a realistic number?
Unfortunately, it is, Brooks, very realistic.
And that's that 408 right there. When you go down through this, we've seen our biggest change in fertilizer over the last year. Chemicals aren't very far behind. I think this number for chemicals last year might have been around $80, so it's increased to $30 per acre. There's been some modest changes like in seed, but it's going to surprise some people that it's $918 per acre, and that's not counting land costs. So we got to take land costs. And of course, that would be your equivalent of your 60/40, the net of what the landlord would get there. Not the 40% that you would pay them, but the net. It could be your cash rent. It can be the return on investment of land that you've got. So we're, in most cases, throughout the I-states, northern Missouri, Kentucky, Ohio, we are looking at costs of over $1,000, in some cases over $1,100 an acre in corn. Margins are good right now, given average yields and the current price. It doesn't take much of a slip in price to see us get into red numbers. It doesn't seem likely. It also sets the stage up for a time when prices correct, and they head just a little bit south. I'm talking $6, $5.50, and it makes times tough. You know, if you look at these, and Sterling, I know you're listening on here, we've talked a tremendous about inflation not playing a role in corn, soybean, and wheat-based prices, but does inflation play a role in these inputs? Sterling, you got a couple seconds to answer that question?
Absolutely. Inflation is definitely going to play a role in this. And when I look at inflation, I look at things not on the consumer price level so much. That's the end product. What I look at is this big equation that creates CPI. And frankly, we're seeing higher oil prices. Diesel prices are not relenting. Everything that goes into making those chemicals is still expensive and volatile. So that means that inflation is going to be there. That does not guarantee higher grain prices.
And that's a great point, because a lot of times, you know, our timing is not one-to-one on whenever we spend the money to put the crop in, or our input, and when we sell the crop. Our crop insurance does give us some floors during the month of February for most of you listening, maybe January 15th through February 15th if you're in the South. We got that guarantee. But a lot of these costs right here they don't coincide with the actual cash that we collect as farmers. So we've almost got this one-off. Our expenses come a little bit before we actually settle for a cash price. So that's always a risk of the market selling off. Marketing, still important in my opinion. I think maybe more so now than ever before. I mentioned an unstoppable market. You know what? It feels bullish. We got a question mark in Ukraine. We've got pretty strong exports. We're a little delayed in planting in the United States. Feels pretty good right now. Feels pretty bullish. Not everybody agrees. Here's a private estimate, and at the bottom of these pages, I thought this was really interesting. Farm price, which is the calculated cash price that it's weighted, and it's by state. It's pretty accurate. USDA puts this out quarterly as to what they think the average price received by the American farmer will be. And you see here, there's a private analyst out here that's very respected that's got a 30-cent decline in farm price. Now, keep in mind, this is an average decline, and we're near the highs right now. So substantial. You see this on beans, a little decline on beans. Whether you choose to be in this camp or not, I don't know, but basically, there are some holes in this market. We are going to see some invisible correction. I talk about that invisible hand, Sterling. How might we be seeing our usage affected today that we might not see on TV, we might not see in a chart? How is today's price affecting overall usage that can affect price for the farmer today?
Well, prices naturally ration demand. And the first place that I'm watching is for a bit of a U-shaped pattern in livestock prices. We're going to see prices drop because we're going to see supplies come down. And we're going to see fewer animals eating that. That's going to be the first thing. And then we're going to see this U-shape where livestock and meat prices go up. The second thing is everyone's going to try and substitute a cheaper item for a cheaper item, meaning if you're India and you're used to buying soybean oil, you're going to buy palm oil. You're going to find in chemicals, everyone's going to try and cut the corners where they can in the manufacturing process. So that in turn will create some degree of natural pressure on demand. How much that is, that's where we're flying in the Bermuda Triangle of finance right now. We don't know how much and how strong the consumer is going to stay in the face of higher prices. The consumer has a lot of money. If he keeps buying, we may not see that demand buckle as much as we might think it will.
Yeah, very good. So there are some things that, we may not even know that we are doing that's adjusting demand. If you go to that grocery store and you were going to put steaks on the grill on Thursday and you look at that steak price and you go and you get a pork chop instead, you're still eating protein, you're still eating pretty good, but there's these slight changes that are taking place. I'm going to transition now from talking about marketing into futures only and hedge to arrive contracts. So I'm going to go back pretty elementary at the very beginning. The cash price, or the price that the farmer takes home, is two components. It's futures and it's basis. Okay, you put the two together. If you're in North Dakota, you know all too well where your basis is at. I see Jason's on the call. 65 under might be a good basis in North Dakota during harvest. Where I'm at on the Ohio River, 65 under would be horrible. So it's all relative as to where you set in conjunction with the market that you're selling. So I'll remind people of that. However, traditionally, we have urged folks to do futures contracts. Futures only contracts don't give you the cash price. They only lock in the futures, and later on, before you deliver, you have to set the basis. Here's what's a little bit scary about a futures only contract today. I'm going to talk a little bit out of both sides of my mouth here over the next few minutes, but it's important that we realize the risks, both to not setting basis and also the risk to setting basis in conjunction with our crop insurance policy. Number one, there is a time when futures become very volatile, and occasionally they can become disconnected with the cash market. Now, I've got a wheat chart on here. This is a Chicago wheat chart. It dates back to the year 2000. Sterling cooked this one up for me this morning. You see two extremes on here. They're easy to see. The first extreme was in 2008. Now, this is the craziest wheat market that I have ever seen in my life. We had trading ranges in $2.40 a bushel in a single day. We had a day where futures were down 80 cents, up $1.40, down $1.10, and that happened within a couple of hours. Extreme volatility. And I don't. Can you guys see my mouse on here where I illustrate 2008? And if you look, you're not seeing things. Look where wheat went. You don't have to look. You don't have to get it perfect, but you see this $11 mark on here. Wheat's north of $11. Okay. At that point in time, the market says, whoa, hold up. The cash market does. Is wheat really $11? The basis during this time in southern Illinois, I can only speak for my neck of the woods on the call, sterling, it got to $2.20 under per bushel. Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. $11 minus $2.20. What if you sold $8 futures? Sterling, if I sold $8 futures, is that a good trade? It sure looks like an awesome trade.
It is. If you sold those futures, you're wearing a $3 loser. Now, if your basis moved up along with that, it's fine. But if your basis doesn't, you have a problem. And this is a thing called convergence, and it's something we have to pay close attention to make sure that the futures market is accurately reflecting at delivery where a majority of the cash market is. And as we all know, basis is a very local thing. So that's something where you need to be a good student of your local basis and understand when basis is good to make sure you can take advantage of that. And futures markets have a lot of different components. They have a lot of global components, and the two do not necessarily always have to connect. And wheat is to be particularly careful with wheat, simply because, one, the Chicago wheat future is a little bit different. We actually grow more spring wheat than Chicago wheat, but the Minneapolis contract isn't as liquid, and you have to figure in all the proteins and everything else you have going on. So if you're in the wheat market, you need to pay very detailed attention. And I do think we do have, much better upside, again, for quality wheat than we do for ordinary wheat.
That's a good point. So let's illustrate this. I put a clipping up here from about 45 days ago of local basis in my area. That's this area up here. we saw a big rally in wheat. Wheat shot up. It went up. It kind of sat around this $8 mark for a while. It was consolidated. We see this rapid rise. Basis, when the market was trading here, was around 10 under to 10 over, depending on where I wanted to deliver my wheat at. And all of a sudden, within 24 hours, this is what I started to see. I saw $1 under, 68 under, $1.13 under, no bid, $1.50 under. That got to an extreme level of no bid to $2 under. Here's what I want to illustrate to you. If you sold $8 wheat, that's historically a great trade. It looked like if you made a futures only, we're going to get back to that, it was a good trade right up until the point you started to have to subtract that basis. Is everybody following me on here? And all of a sudden, I know a lot of you have got the question, how does that affect crop insurance? How does that affect? We're going to talk about that in a second, but we have to be very careful on futures only. Now, 2 months ago, we start the situation in Ukraine. Erling and I hosted a Friday meeting, and we talked a little bit about corn basis. We talked about the absence of corn out of Ukraine. How could that affect the basis in the United States? Sterling, I'm going to say we were right, and we were also wrong, okay? Corn basis, if you were in the interior, didn't explode like Sterling and I thought it might. However, corn basis in the Gulf did explode. It traded at $1.45 over the Board of Trade. Why didn't we see that? Well, we got this little factor called freight that slipped in. We had a meeting where we talked about how barges were a little bit short. Sterling, can you kind of illustrate to folks how, again, we're kind of throwing in another variable here, something you don't think about. How can freight and the inflation that you talked about earlier affect our basis even when we've got really strong demand?
Okay, you can have strong global demand. I have wheat in Nebraska or corn in Nebraska that's destined to go to Germany because they're not able to get it from there. Remember, you have two independent markets. It's kind of like, remember, if you think back to 1998 when hog prices collapsed, I mean, hog futures got down to 25 cents a pound. Ham prices at the store didn't change at all. They're two independent variables that works on what that elevator can handle. If we see freight prices drop, it's easier to move it. That gives the elevator some room to work. If freight is higher, they may not be as aggressive about buying your corn, especially if there's plenty of corn around there. So we're going to see these play out, and it's going to be different because we're still having freight and logistic problems. We're still having, elevated energy prices. So paying attention to freight is going to be just another component of what that guy in Germany is going to be willing to pay for the corn, because he doesn't really care what the corn costs. He cares about what it costs when it lands at that port in Rotterdam.
Good explanation there. So what we had done previously is we had kind of encouraged folks maybe not to get so deep in futures-only contracts that we traditionally promoted. We've promoted them for a couple reasons. Our crop insurance policies are designed to protect futures. But we were a little bit scared. If we get this market that goes to $10 in December corn, not suggesting that it will, where will that put basis? That's a big question mark. So what we did was we started to encourage people to look at priced contracts. It's not all roses and priced contracts either, because we're going to find out here in a couple of slides, our insurance policies don't really protect against priced contracts. They just look at futures. Along with those price contracts, we had talked about put options, okay? Put options give you the ability, the right to sell futures, but not the obligation. We talked a lot about that. We're not going to turn this into a put option seminar, but I did pull up an option in that, in my opinion, doesn't look too bad. Now, if you talk to a lot of brokers, if you talk to people that like to put together combinations, they might laugh at this one because it's so elementary, but this is what we're going to talk about today. I want the right, but not the obligation to sell futures. Sterling, do I want to sell $7 futures if the market's at $8?
Not really. You're already buying a dollar loser, so that's really not a very clever idea.
So we don't have to use it. That's where this comes in. We don't have the obligation to sell, but we do have the right. Now, if the market goes to $6 or $5.50, do I want to sell $7 futures? You better believe it. So that's where an option comes in. They're expensive. They don't give us a floor that's very close to the market, but I want you to look at something. I want you to look at the floor that they do give us. A $7 strike, in other words, the right to sell $7 futures, but not the obligation. The last trade, and I pulled these off from pretty early this morning, 5:14 a.m., was around 50 7/8 cents. That is a big premium to pay, but I'm going to tell you this. Never one day in history on, what is today, April 21st? April 21st, have I had the ability as a farmer to put a $7 minus 51 cent floor on corn. Not a single day. Not a single day in history. I've got a 649 December floor. It's kind of the equivalent of a futures only contract. So all of a sudden now we're back to apples. Sterling, when I buy this, I've illustrated how I've got that floor at 649. Tell me about my ceiling. How much could I benefit if the market does go to $9 or $10, like some people are suggesting?
Well, if we're at $8 right now, it goes up to $9. You lose the 50 cents you paid on the put. You'll be happy you lost that 50 cents because you just made $1 on the board. So this gives you a solid floor that again is historically very, very high. Your ceiling is unlimited. If corn for some reason, and I'm not saying it's going to, but if corn were to go to $12, you're going to feel awfully good about this because it's going to give you a situation of comfort and you're going to make a profit off of this year that will help you for the next 3.
So what you just said is I've got limited risk. It's the 50 3/4 or 51 cents. We'll just round 51 cents. And I've got unlimited upside through about Thanksgiving. It's going to expire about Thanksgiving. The beautiful thing about that is we know what kind of crop we've got by Thanksgiving in the vast majority of the United States.
Oh, you certainly do. In fact, you really probably have a pretty good handle on it in July. August, you really have a pretty good grip.
We're running a little bit behind on where I wanted to be on a timeline. I promised I would be efficient with your time. If you've got questions on this slide, reach out to us at that email I supplied earlier, or direct to Sterling or myself. We'll walk you through that. This is the part that I wanted a lot of people within the company to see. Understanding our coverage. You guys know how a policy works. You guys are experts in it. You know where futures are established early on in that projected price. You know where our trigger points on when an indemnity is paid out. You know how it works if the market goes up in the fall. We don't have to go through that. What we need to go through, though, these next 2 slides are most important, especially if you're an employee of AgriSompo. And if you're a farmer that's listening, they're important to know anyway. The marketing strategies that we've talked about so far are the futures only, the priced or cash sales. That's that price contract where we've got futures and basis locked in. And then we just talked about buying that put option. I'm going to make it very simple. And these strategies, while you may not be experts at them, you kind of get the gist of what we've talked about. In a futures only contract, does my strategy protect my actual take-home price? The answer is no. You know that from what we just talked about. Basis can be $2 over. Basis can be $2 under. We don't have that guarantee. We also, you throw in a caveat like freight, and what we think we know, all of a sudden doesn't work out because that good premium we've got at our used market may be really weakened by the amount of freight that it takes to get it there. So there's a lot of caveats in there. So we don't have our take-home protected when we make a futures-only contract. Does my revenue protection, I'm talking about the insurance here, give me strong protection when buying back my strategy? So let's stop and talk about this. If we have that obligation to sell, most of the time, most of us and most farmers have that commercial elevator. You've got an agreement, a contractual agreement that you're going to deliver those corn and the beans at a certain futures price. Does our policy do a pretty good job at protecting that? It does. It does. Now, I put something on here. It's important to understand your cancellation timing. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. but we need to cancel when our policy protects us. For most people listening, the month of October is when we get that harvest price average. If that harvest price is higher than the price you sold on your futures only contract, it's important that we try to cancel at about the level that we're going to receive an indemnity from the insurance company. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. A priced or cash contract, when we set futures and basis, does it protect my take-home price? Absolutely. You got no downside, you got no upside, you know what you're going to get. Does my policy protect against buying this back in the event that I've got a disaster? And this could be argued either way, but no, it does not. Crop insurance does not take into consider basis. So your buyback could be significantly different than the indemnity that you receive on your policy. Now, it's going to protect a big chunk of it, okay? But it won't protect one-to-one. That's something to be very cautious about. Now, if you're in an area where basis is traditionally low, then this is a great thing because your policy is going to pay you face value of the futures and not take into consideration that basis. If you're in an area where basis is high, it could be a factor. Buying put options. Okay, you can tell I kind of like this strategy for a person that's a little bit unsure of what to do. Does buying a put option affect my take-home price? Does it lock it in? No, it doesn't, because basis isn't set. As a matter of fact, futures aren't really set. We've got the obligation, but not the right to sell futures at a level, but we've got that guaranteed floor. Does my revenue protection policy protect against buying this back? And my answer is yes. We will not be able to recover that original premium. And in our example earlier, that was the 51 cents. But a crop insurance that does a great job of protecting overall risk in this. So you can kind of see some pros and cons to each one of these. And I know that we kind of recommend one and sort of recommend another one. We just want everybody to know the risks that are involved with each one of these. Because when we get a market that's doing what it's doing, it's similar to what we saw in 2008 wheat. It's similar to what we see in wheat doing today. That's when the market can really act unpredictable in a cash stance. And I want everybody to realize that you can take the historic basis charts and really throw them away right now. Matter of fact, you can take a lot of the charts that we've looked at, even in these meetings that we felt to be kind of ultimate truths right now, and kind of suspend those for a while because it's a new ballgame. I want to address one last thing before we switch over to you, Mike, and that is that if you're on the ASNA team and you're listening, even if you're an independent agent out there, knowing the National Grain and Feed Association trade rules is really important. What this does is 95% of the delivery locations for your customers or your farmers operate under the NGFA trade rules. As a matter of fact, when those cash contracts are sent out, like the futures contracts, the price contracts, on the back in the fine print, you're going to see NGFA trade rules. And as a matter of fact, if there's ever a problem, there's an arbitration board that settles all these. Buyer and seller agrees to these. There's one rule in here that I want everybody to walk away from today and know. Most of the farmers that have obligations of delivery and a price agreement with a commercial elevator or a processor, there's a line in there. And what that line says is when the farmer picks up the phone and says, I've got a problem, my crop is drought stricken, I don't think I'm going to be able to deliver this, the buyer has an obligation to cancel that contract within 24 hours or the next trade date of that contract. Okay, so here's the issue. I want everybody to know this because this came into play in 2012. It's the only time prices have been higher than they are right now. But in August, a lot of farmers said, oh my gosh, I'm drought stricken. I'm not going to have these bushels. They hit the panic button about July 15th from August 15th. They called the elevator. They thought they were doing the right thing. They wanted to give these guys a heads up they couldn't deliver. Mr. Elevator, I can't deliver this contract. Their contractual obligation as a buyer is to cancel that contract out within 24 hours of you telling them that you can't deliver. So ask yourself this question: does my traditional revenue protection policy protect me against buying out of my contract on August 1st? You see where the problem lies. We don't have any protection on August 1st. Our protection are the higher of the two averaging periods, the projected price in the spring or the fall price. In that exact scenario, there's a lot of people that canceled contracts between 8 and 8.50 on futures. They were later indemnified by their insurance at $7.50. It's important, even when we are unsure of whether we're going to be able to fulfill the delivery obligation, that we match up our cancellation with our insurance timing period. You want to do it as close to the October average as you possibly can. That's a tough thing to do. There's no science behind it, and it goes against every grain of any responsible person because they want to give a heads up. But you have to know for a fact that you're not going to have that grain. You also want to be careful and not cancel that contract until we get to October, until we get to that fall pricing period, because the check that you get from AgriSompo North America may be far off of where you canceled that price at with the elevator. Something to keep in mind. I'm going to pause right now. Any questions before we jump over to the agronomy side of things?
Yes, Brooks, there is one question that came in.
Okay.
It says, with high option premium and delayed planting, would it be smart to wait until the majority of the crop is planted before you buy a put option so the premium decays some?
It's a chance that you can take. Obviously, time value will erode on these. It may give us a chance to get a higher strike. So there's a lot of people right now in the waiting room to buy put options, and they want to wait until that time value comes down. Volatility is going to be extremely high, and they're going to keep these options pretty high. That $7 strike, I would not look for it to. If the market stays stagnant right here, I don't know if you're going to save yourself very many pennies over the next 30 days. That's just my opinion. If the market does move higher, obviously intrinsic value will take away some of that option premium. But right now, I don't see them getting a lot cheaper, even if the market is stagnant over the next 3 to 4 weeks. So yes, in theory, you're right. The longer you wait, time value erodes. I think this is a great strategy right up before you know what you've got in the field. So for a lot of us listening, June 15th through July 15th, you start to get a little bit better idea of where my crop's at, okay? You may not want to sell all your bushels there, but I think between now and probably August 1st, those put options look like they're favorable to me. After that, if you've got the crop and the market's at $7.50 or $8, makes it a whole lot easier to write that cash contract that we were talking about, or even a futures only contract. Good question.
I don't have any other questions. No, I don't have any others at this time. But if you do, go ahead and put those in that chat box, or you're welcome to send those to marketinginfo@sompointernational.com. I do have that in the chat box if you have those.
You probably won't hear from the rest of the meeting, so I'm going to throw out one more invitation. If you are, again, AgriSompo North America employee, we talk so much about how marketing is protected with crop insurance, and you've got further questions on this. It's a little bit confusing. I know I've thrown a lot at you in a short amount of time. Really reach out to us because it is concerning to me. I want to make sure that our farmers know exactly where their protection's at and where it's not. There are always some holes that we never see. So, Mike, you get to tell us all the good news about how planning process is perfect and we're way ahead of schedule, right?
Yeah, I wish that was the case, Brooks. What we're going to talk about today, I want to kind of talk about a little snapshot of where the U.S. is as of today on planning progress. And more importantly, look toward our prospects. Again, I'm based out of Bloomington, Illinois, and we had another 6/10 last night, so pretty soggy here. My slides don't want to advance, Christy.
It's all on you. You should have everything.
Let me try this one more time, Christy. shows. We'll start this up one more time.
Okay.
There we go. Thanks, Chrissy.
Yep, no worries.
Just locked up there with too much stuff. I think as I start today, I wanted to start looking at the 30-day actual moisture map compared to normal map. And what we're looking at this map, all the areas that are in the greens to blues to kind of pinkish purple are where we've had too much moisture over the last 30 days, slowing our planters down. And I see a big problem area developing in North Dakota. North Dakota was in pretty good shape 2 weeks ago. I know it was cold there, but based on the blizzards and the snow, that North Dakota situation is getting pretty tough now. Very heavy moisture over the last 30 days. Also, like Brooks talked about earlier, pretty good moisture content down here in the Delta, slowing those farmers down. Working our way through most of Arkansas. Parts of Missouri are running pretty good. Other parts are kind of stuck in the mud. And most of Illinois is also pretty wet. I was in Wisconsin last week, a little more moisture up there up through Michigan. So again, a big chunk of the Delta up through Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, North Dakota, pretty wet over the last 30 days. On the flip side, very limited soil moisture working our way through Nebraska, Sterling's home state, most of Kansas, South Dakota. And one funny thing about Iowa, I guess not funny, but kind of unusual, it's been fairly dry in Iowa, but it's been so cold there, the planters haven't been rolling really rapidly. Next, I've got a slide of where the snow cover is this morning and how much moisture is in the snow. And if you look at that North Dakota map, it looks like that snow is pretty uniform, but that is not the case. What I've heard on social media and talking to farmers and reading about what's going on there, it seems like most of the snow's in piles. So not a lot of snow in the fields and lots of snow on the edges and some of the drifts. So again, that's not as uniform as suggests, but got a lot of snow in North Dakota. It sounds like potentially more snow, especially for western and central North Dakota coming from this weekend. So here's what the numbers look like as of Sunday night or the Monday morning report. We just had 4% of the U.S. corn crop planted as April 17th. We just put 2% in last week. 7% was our progress at this time last year, and the 5-year average, and we have to remember about the 5-year average, it's got 2019 in there, which is a very slow planting progress number, was 6%. So we're running just slightly behind average. And kind of my thoughts are, especially if you're farming in Iowa, South Dakota, the cold's probably been as responsible for the slow start as the wet. I know here in McLean County in central Illinois, we get 3 nice warm sunny days. We'll be doing a lot of corn planting, but we haven't really got the warm along with the drier weather. So does that 4% number concern me on this soggy McLean County morning? Looking at the U.S., I'm going to give you a no on that one. I think a number under 10% on next week's report, which looks likely based on today's math, would be concerning for some corn growing areas. And the farmers who are the most concerned about not getting their corn planted in April are kind of located from the Delta up to the Mid-South and into southern Illinois. Why are they so worried about not getting their corn in April? Even if they've got water, fields under the pivot, they worry about increased pollination heat. They really want to get that corn silking by late June, first couple of days of July. And as that planting date pushes into May, potentially, they do have more heat worries about their corn crop. For the farmers here in Illinois, we'd like to have our crop on the ground, the farmers in Iowa, Indiana. But again, it's not a critical thing at this point, because if you would have planted corn a month ago, it wouldn't have grown anyway here in most of the Midwest. What's our soybean planting progress look like as of Sunday? Just 1% in the ground. 3% was our progress last year, which was the most early beans I've seen in history get planted. And the 5-year average is just 2%. So again, not much going on in the soybean planting progress. A lot of farmers were geared up to plant early this year. The 2 things that stopped most of them, one was the wet conditions where it's wet, and the thing that stopped a lot of them was the cold weather. Right or wrong here, does that 1% U.S. planting progress concern me as of this morning? I'm going to give you a no. I know here in McLean County, a couple growers have planted beans as early as St. Patrick's Day, and I drove by those fields a couple days ago, and those beans are nowhere close to the surface. Maybe they will come up this week, and we'll have to see. So right or wrong, I would prefer my soybeans still in the shed if I farm in the parts of the Midwest that have been cold, snowy, and rainy, which is a big chunk of the at least central Midwest. On the flip side, though, I think where we may have some yield issues, it seems like to me over the last 5, 6, 7 years, the guys who are growing those 80, 90, 100 bushel beans on rotated ground are planting those beans somewhere early to mid-April. And I think those chances for those ultra-high soybean yields on rotated ground kind of slip away as planting dates slip into May. So we'll see how that transpires. Probably a bigger concern, again, I'm not a spring wheat expert, but looking at the maps now, we're just 8% in the ground as of April 17th. That was just a 2% increase over the prior year. And last year, the spring wheat guys, due to the dry soils, were able to get the crop in pretty early. 18% was in the ground this time last year. And the 5-year average is around 9%. So a snapshot as of Sunday, 8% of the spring wheat in the ground, 9% is the average. But unfortunately, this week, not much spring wheat is being planted, at least in North Dakota and Minnesota. I am concerned about the 8% spring wheat planting date as of this morning. Why am I so concerned? It looks like current snow cover, again, that snow is not uniform. We may have to kind of work around some of those snow piles as the snow melts. I checked this morning's NOAA map, and there's a winter storm watch for part of western and northern North Dakota. And again, it looks like getting much more spring wheat in the ground in North Dakota is getting less likely by the day. And why do growers like to get their spring wheat in early? As May planting dates affect wheat, it increases heat risk for when the wheat pollinates and also fill for the wheat. I'm kind of looking at some of the optimum and late planting date studies coming out of North Dakota. Kind of got a busy slide here, but up here in the southern part of North Dakota, optimum planting date for spring wheat has already passed. That was the second week of April. Working our way further north in North Dakota, the optimum planting date is the third week of April. And all the way up to the Canadian border is the first week of May. And generally, there's roughly 1 month after the optimum date to get that wheat in the ground. And right now, if you're in the far southern part of North Dakota, we've already lost roughly 1.5 bushels per day. So again, my number one concern, not so much concerned about corn, except for the Delta, working my way through southern Illinois. Really not concerned about soybeans. The more concern I have is on the spring wheat at this point. What about the 7-day moisture? That's an interesting map. It kind of changed a little bit. I've got 3 areas of concern on the 7-day moisture map. Number one is that North Dakota situation, more moisture for most of North Dakota. And again, that's going to be pretty cold, some snow, going to slow things up. Another area of concern is kind of where this warm front sets up. Right now, the warm front is supposed to set up in southern Iowa, and those reds are pushing 3 to 4 inches of rain. That would be enough to really push those guys and ladies back another 2-3 weeks. And we've also got more moisture. This would be a little bit of positive rain through parts of Texas and Oklahoma, but we've got that storm front coming with the cold front coming this weekend. So 3 areas of rain. We've got the North Dakota situation, the warm front sitting up, and where does the cold front develop? We've got a little bit of good news in the 6 to 10 day outlook. That puts us April 26th to the 30th. Precipitation is below normal for most of the U.S., so that is a positive thing to get more planters rolling. Unfortunately, though, we've got more cold weather, especially if you're farming in the north through the central and the east. That's well below normal temperatures. That will really slow down the drying process. So most of the Midwest is looking at a warm 3 to 4 days, rain chances, and then we cool right back off the early part of next week. 8 to 14 day, we still got the cold weather bias in the central, north, and east, but there are more precipitation chances. Some of this rain will be welcome in Nebraska into Kansas, but rain would not be welcome here in the central belt. We're going to have to kind of see how much transpires. I really don't see a lot of planting done this week, except for parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, maybe Nebraska, but we'll see how that transpires. I've heard this comment a lot on farmer social media, listen to the analysts talk. Once it dries up, will the crop go in fast? I agree with that statement. Why? Over the last decade, I've really seen these things really increase our pace of planting progress. Increasing numbers of farm operations can plant corn and soybeans at the same time. Maybe if you're up north, you're planting wheat and sunflowers at the same time. So more and more farmers can plant multiple crops at the same time. That gets more crop on the ground in a much faster time frame. Planters are bigger and faster. And probably the number one thing that I've seen talking to my farmer friends, GPS auto steer keeps farmers fresher. Many of them will run 24/7, maybe 2-3 days in a row, hopefully get a little bit of rest in there. But these 3 things have really increased our opportunity to get a lot of crop in the ground in a very short period of time. Some negatives of a very fast, tight planting window are as follows. Farmers do a pretty good job of working the ground when they can, but one thing I've noticed whenever it's been wet like it has been this year, conditions are marginal. Maybe the wet spots are a little bit too damp. We sure can compact a lot of soil in a short time frame because we have all that iron, all those planters, and all those big and fast planters. So that is a negative. When you kind of mud the first couple of days of a planting season in, that can give us some issues as far as compaction. This is a concern maybe down in Brooks area. I'd be really concerned about. I was down in southern Illinois 10 days ago, and I was really worried about the winter annuals slowing my drying process down. How are we getting all those fields sprayed in a timely manner? And what about the guys in the southern belt who can't put fall nitrogen on? If they switch to 28%, will the retailers be able to get that nitrogen applied in a timely manner? How can we get those tanks turned around? There's been some talk about trucking shortages. So again, whenever the planting season breaks in a 1 or 2 day window, that really makes the input supply challenges more likely. And one thing too, this could be good or bad, and usually it's a bad thing, but whenever you plant your corn, say the first 10 days of May, it's going to put a very tight pollination window. If we get good weather during that pollination window, that's a good thing for crops, but more likely as we plant later, we have more tendencies to have more heat, and that could be a negative as far as that later in a tight window. One more comment here as it relates to pre-plant. This is a snip I took on my local elevator here in central Illinois. I'm looking at new crop corn this morning. My October-November bid was $7.13. The bean price was $14.97. I think with these prices, I think growers want to farm anyway. I think they're going to do whatever they can to get a crop on the ground. So as long as we have these nice prices, I think we're going to try to get a crop on the ground even in some of those wetter areas. My last two slides here today before I turn it over to Sterling, I wanted to look at our long-term moisture situation. And we kind of got the tale of two areas. We've got this area through northern central Illinois and Wisconsin. That one's probably going to go away over time. Iowa's improving except for the Northwest. So we've got an improving moisture situation, basically central North Dakota, down through Iowa, down through the Delta and through the east. And we've got a very persistent drought, central Texas, working my way through Oklahoma, most of Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. So again, biggest problem area, long-term soil moisture is through here. And we've got improving moisture throughout much of the Midwest. In fact, we kind of flipped from being too dry to too wet. And my last slide here today just kind of shows up in my week change on the map. All the areas in green, like down here in the Delta where they want those plants to be rolling, are getting wetter. We've had some soil improvements also here in parts of Minnesota and North Dakota. And we've got a lot of dry weather, though, from central southern Texas up through parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, especially western Kansas, is much drier. And again, Sterling's home state of Nebraska continues to dry out. We also saw some significant drying South Dakota and northwest Iowa last week. So we'll kind of watch those maps. Any questions for myself here? It's going to be an interesting week to continue to watch the weather maps. If you're not reading my FYI, I kind of talk weather every day. I've been writing about once a day now. We'll kind of update everybody as planting season hopefully continues to roll on and we get a bunch of crop on the ground here. Looks like to me, best case scenario for most of the Midwest, Eastern Belt, Northern Belt, 1st of May, and probably my biggest concern state right now is probably North Dakota. Snow on the ground, cold forecast, and a shorter growing season. At that point, I'm done. Chrissy, if you have any questions for me, if not, we can turn it over to Sterling.
Yeah, I have not seen any questions that have come in. Of course, if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in that chat box or in the Q&A box. Be happy to get those asked and answered as quickly as possible for you. Sterling, I have passed the ball over to you, but real quick, Mike, before I forget, I am traveling to Iowa this weekend and next. So while I'm traveling that way for some basketball tournaments,
cool.
We'll try to get some pictures taken for you. So
yeah, been trying to find you a picture of somebody planting crops. I finally saw one on Easter Sunday, but that's the only one. I've been 3,000 miles over the last month, so very limited planting.
I know here in Pike County, Illinois, there's nobody that has been in the field that I've seen other than just looking at the tractors. I think that's pretty much been it. So Sterling, I have passed the ball off to you. So take it away.
And thank you, and I do appreciate that, Christy. And we're going to talk about the construct of some markets here and some near-term ideas about where we actually are with things. Christy, can everyone see my slide?
You're looking good, Sterling.
Yep.
Okay. So the first item we're going to look at here is July wheat. And as you can see, we had the large run-up tied to the Ukrainian invasion where wheat prices moved from $8 to $12 a bushel in about a week and a half. And anytime we get a big run-up like this, and you've seen this in natural gas over the last couple of days, it's followed by this invariable drop that we get and the market begins to trade. And we've slowly began to stage a bit of a recovery, and we've been a little bit weaker here of late. Part of this is exports of wheat are coming out of Russia, and they're coming out of Russia at a rate for April. We're going to probably see 3 times the normal amount of wheat coming out of Russia that we normally see. Right now, the Russians have the wheat, they have it to sell, and they're selling it at a discount to the rest of the market because of the sanctions. So people are coming in here and buying this wheat, and that is creating a natural pressure on the wheat market. Because again, when you get explosive markets like this, speculators kind of move away from the market a little bit. You maybe don't get the same thing that you get with the weather market. So that has caused wheat prices to ease a little bit. Now, when we look and we talk about speculators, we talk about 2 things: where they're positioned and what their capacity can be and what their inclination is to go forward. This is a chart of the current fund position for wheat. And right now, and this is for Chicago, and there's 2 very different pictures between Chicago and Minneapolis. But right now, Chicago, they're short about 36,000 contracts of wheat. Now, when they came in and bought that wheat that they were short when they invaded the Ukraine, yeah, they were short covering. They went from minus 55,000 to about minus 27,000. So they bought a mere 27,000 contracts, and that helped create that push. Now, when we look at this historically, we are not anywhere near a record position that we saw back in 2020, or going back here to the longer positions that we saw back in 2008. So what this means, if prices turn volatile, there is capacity in the funds to start covering this, which can create unusual upward pressure. Now, what Mike just talked about with the wheat is very important. Spring wheat matters a lot more than Chicago wheat does to the real price of wheat than does what happens in Chicago. Chicago is more of a fund item. And when you look at the Minneapolis wheat fund position, which I'm going to punch up here right now, and we'll take a look at the chart of the Minneapolis wheat here too while we're doing that. If we look at Minneapolis wheat, picture is noticeably different. Here was the run-up with the Ukrainian invasion. Notice these prices have returned right back to their highs. If we're going to have a leader, it's going to be in the quality wheat, because when the miller goes to make his bread, he needs the quality wheat, and then he blends it with filler wheat that's cheaper to get to his formula. Now, if we move over and we take a look at where the funds positioned are in Minneapolis wheat, once again, this is noticeably different. We go look at the managed position for Minneapolis here. Funds have been in here, and by historic norms, you have about 18,000 long contracts. As you can see, as we go back in time, we have a very elevated position. Now, the risk in the elevated position is that they liquidate. The other risk is if we start to get a story developing, meaning we see more cold weather, particularly in the Dakotas and in Montana, and they can't get this crop in, there can be much more aggressive buying going on, and that will push the Minneapolis wheat higher, and that will naturally lift the rest of the wheat contracts. So I've heard some people talking on TV, etc., about, oh, wheat is topped out and everything like that. That could be a very, very dangerous statement. Once the Russians don't have the wheat to export, we're going to have a Ukrainian crop that I'm not sure they're going to be able to move or harvest. Half of Ukraine's harvest from the previous year that was supposed to be exported is still in their storage. They're going to start harvesting that stuff, the winter wheat, very, very shortly. A lot of it is not going to be able to be moved. In Ukraine, the railroad tracks are Russian 5-foot gauge. They are not the same as they are in the rest of Europe. So any of this that they're going to have to move, they're going to have to move via rail. And when they load it on their train, as soon as they get to the Romanian border or the Polish border, it's going to have to be unloaded and moved. So their ability to move that grain is going to be problematic. That's going to be a story that's going to start filtering out and into Wall Street here. And remember, Wall Street's not all that smart. So once they start hearing this, this is something that could create a volatile situation for the wheat, and we could again see wheat prices become quite elevated. Brooks showed you the high back in 2010. We saw Minneapolis wheat prices explode. And part of this is if wheat prices go up, that doesn't really have that big of an impact on the consumer immediately. In a loaf of whole wheat bread from one bushel of wheat, you can make about 100 loaves. So guess what? If the price goes up $1, you've only added a penny to the price of a loaf of bread. Everything else that goes into that inflation are other components. And that's kind of the way things work for chemicals as well. So we do have more upside potential again over time as we look at the wheat contracts. Now, we're going to go ahead and move on, and we're going to talk about corn. December corn, we are seeing the best springtime prices we have ever seen. And if we look at old crop, it's trading about 50 cents higher. They've been trading quite in unison. And this is very different from what we saw in 2012. In 2012, yes, deferred contracts moved higher, but almost all of the strength was concentrated in the new crop. The market is looking forward a little bit here, and we may be looking at a situation where we see further elevated price levels longer. Now, what's going to come with this is going to be a degree of volatility that's going to be a little bit different. If we look at corn today, we've been as low as 736 and a quarter, as high as 748 and a half. That's a 12-cent range. I remember back in the day when I was at the Board of Trade, you might have a 12-cent range for a busy week. So get used to prices gyrating. I think on the very near term, right now we're in a very slow news situation. If we begin to see crops going easier, are they going more difficultly, which I think we have the possibility of having happen here in Nebraska. We're finally getting a little bit of moisture that we desperately need, but we've only had 1 or 2 warm days, and we have had incredible weather volatility here. We had one day last week where the temperature start was at 50 degrees at noon. It rose to 95 degrees by 5 o'clock. At 8 o'clock in the morning, we had a tornado. The next morning, we had snow. Now, I know the weather here can be a little stupid, but that's taking it to an entirely different level. And that volatile weather, crops don't like that. So to think we're going to have perfect weather this year, again, that's being awfully aggressive. But if we move into the fund position in corn, right now they're long 270,000 odd contracts. And by historic norms, that's elevated. But their recent record high, well before the Ukrainian invasion and anything else like that, was 435,000. There is plenty of capacity in here for funds to come in and buy corn. They are partly responsible for this run-up, but if we look at everything since the report and everything, they've been buyers. They haven't been that big of buyers, though. So there's more going on with this market, and the potential for volatility is going to be very, very high. We're going to have a very twitchy corn market where if it gets dry, it's going to be bid up heavy, and everyone's going to be leaning on a forecast. The forecast turns a little bit wetter, it's going to turn more volatile. And that's something where Brooke's talking about a put strategy may be a lot easier to manage, especially if we begin to develop problems and we can take this corn and we can begin to push it up into a higher level. And if consumers are willing to stomach higher food prices, which they've been willing to do, they have been willing to stomach higher airfares. They're paying up without any issue. So as long as the consumer has money, that's going to keep and expand our window for how much prices can go up, at least on the consumer end, and some of that will filter back, and that may not affect that rationing process that eventually we're going to have to get to. And now we're going to talk about one other thing, and this always, the people in Texas are going to love me, and again, the people everywhere else are going to start throwing rocks at me. This is a chart of crude oil. And as you can see, well before the Ukrainian invasion and even in the buildup leading to it, crude oil was in a very solid bull market. Right here was the invasion where we rallied the market, and we had the subsequent break. Here's where we decided we're going to shoot another 1 million barrels a day of crude oil into the market. And we had our little drop. And guess what? It doesn't really care. It doesn't really matter. The most important thing for those inflation numbers, or one of them, is diesel pump prices. They're still well north of $5 in the U.S. They're pushing $10 in Europe. So ideas that we're going to get some inflationary relief. I think, again, we can very easily see a sort of a U-shaped pattern with inflation where we have a bit of a peak, we trough a little bit. The second half of the year, unless there's some dramatic changes in supply chains and things of that sort, that inflation is going to be around. One other thing, there are a lot of lockdowns in China right now. Road mileage, people driving in China, has dropped off the face of the earth. Think about the city of Shanghai that has a population of 30 million people and parking all the cars. So that demand is out of the crude oil market right now, and that is being reflected certainly in these prices. So the risk of elevated crude, you can see here, the longer-term trend is we are generally pushing higher. This is our short-term bid. If we can trade above this red line, our chances of moving higher and moving back towards that 125 to 130 area, even with the release from the SPR, the market doesn't care. What you can think about that SPR is, think about, you have two pots of soup on your stove. You have one pot and you have a second pot. Releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve basically moves that soup from one pot to the other. You still don't have that much more soup. Doesn't really change. And the market's beginning to acknowledge that on a more broad term. So yes, input prices are going to stay elevated. Our potential for volatility is going to be much more elevated, and we're seeing this with cost increase, everything from the cost of money to the cost of bubble gum. Everything's going up, and thus far there isn't much sign of a bigger, more systemic relief coming. Christy, did we have any questions? Is there any other topics that anybody would like me to talk about? I can certainly go over livestock real quick if people would like to be indulged.
Let me see here. I'm not seeing any questions. Let me see. I thought I saw somebody typing. No. But
Okay.
you can, if you have any questions, put those in that chat box. Wait just a second here. Somebody did type, good morning, interest rates. Somebody asked what the current interest rates are.
All right. Well, we can get those actually in real time. Right here is the current 10-year interest rate to spot 915, and we're going to make a chart of this because there's things going on in here. Interest rates, as you can see, are moving up. The biggest risk for markets isn't so much that they're going up. Everybody and their donkey knows they're going up. It's speed at which this happens. And yesterday we had a nice little pullback, and part of that was the market nicked the $3 area into the 3% area, and it didn't take it out. So there was profit taking going on in the short side of the market. And as you can see today, we're recovering. And how we can measure that, and I put these in the commentary. Every day, or most every day, we take a look at the 10-year futures. You can short bonds, but you don't want to sell the actual bond. That's a disaster. You have to pay interest, and it's a mess. There's liquidity issues. The way you short the bond market is you sell bond futures. And these move inversely to interest rates. So as you can see, as these go down, rates go up. And what we have here is a market that is deeply oversold. So what happens while rates are trending up, every so often, we didn't take out the 3% area. So what we can see here is we had a little blip of buying here, and that moved the market for a day because you had people taking profits. At some point, yeah, these things are going to uncoil, and we're going to see things spike. I think we can take the 10-year as we move through the year. 350 will be a key area. At that point, I think we're going to see rates invert. We're going to see interest rates drop, most likely tied to, and I know I've been beating this drum, we're in a bear market in stocks. It behaves exactly like a bear market should behave. Short, mean, fierce rallies, followed by, looks like it's going to fall off a cliff. Doesn't quite fall off the cliff, and you get another one of those short, mean little rallies. Miserable things to trade. At some point here, we're probably going to have to clean that market out. When that happens, interest rates will drop suddenly for a very short period of time, and they will re-elevate themselves. So interest rates are trending higher. If you're going to try and time it, it's going to be very, very tough. If you need to lock in long-term money, I'm not saying you missed the boat a month ago. I mean, that's obvious, Captain Obvious stuff. But if we think we're going to see interest rates cheaper in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, that isn't going to happen. That is not in the Fed's cards. And I'm loath to predict exactly where we're going to stop, because the Fed will stop. There's a natural ceiling at right around 3.5% on short-term rates, simply because when you look at the size of the deficit, that's going to be pushing up interest rate payments. How much they want to go beyond that, things are going to get a little bit different in that, and how much they're going to be willing to push them up above beyond that. And if they can't, that means the inflation is going to be much more sticky, and the risk of having an inflation spiral becomes much higher, because inflation is not an event when it's really inflation. It becomes a wage price spiral where wages continue to move up and prices have to continue moving up, and you see money chasing money. And right now the consumer is very liquid and he's willing to spend, and that is naturally inflationary.
Okay. Wow.
And one other thing, make sure to listen to the podcasts. When we do that morning call, and encourage all your customers to please listen to the podcast, that morning call that comes over the phone has a time constraint on it where I have to compress everything together. What I do with the podcast, I have plenty of time to talk. And the morning one is a little bit longer. The afternoon one that I do at 3 o'clock is a wrap up of everything that goes on to work as a companion for the DMO.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interested in livestock, I cover that. I think that's going to be a very interesting market, certainly for the next 24 months for both the consumer and the producer. And I'm slowly expanding the items that I cover with that.
Yeah. So we do have two more questions, Sterling. One is to go through livestock, but before that, how will using E15 year-round affect our corn numbers?
Is E15 going year-round going to affect our corn numbers? That's going to depend, one, on miles driven. Right now, the consumer is going to be willing to drive, and that is going to push up demand. We have nearby corn sitting at $8 a bushel. We have aggressive old crop export sales going on right now. How much more they're going to be willing to blend is questionable. E15 is a bit of a dubious prospect. When you put it in your car, you are using less crude oil. However, you will suffer a mileage regression with that. You won't go as far on the gas. And once consumers figure that out, well, yeah, this gas is a smidge cheaper, but I have to fill up every 3.5 days instead of every 5 days or every 4 days. I don't think it's going to take off. And we also have to think about delivery capacity in the U.S. As far as, E15 here in Omaha, everybody in Omaha buys their gas at Costco. You go there, there's a line stretching halfway down Dodge Street most times. They don't have the capacity to deliver it. So if you don't have the capacity to deliver it, I'm not entirely sure it's going to be a big deal. I think that could be more political kabuki theater. Hey, I'm the administration. I'm trying to do something about this, and I'm going to help farmers, more than it's going to actually have a real material effect on things.
Wow.
And livestock. All right. Let's go ahead and let's talk about the wide world of livestock. And, okay, this is a chart of the June cattle futures. We're now trading at $1.39 a pound, 139 a hundredweight. We have come out of a fairly bearish situation. We're moving into a better consumption time for beef. Beef consumption generally moves up, and prices usually follow between now and Memorial Day, and they tend to stay strong in the summer. Right now, cutout prices have been a little bit depressed, and that goes back to what Mike's talking about, it being cold. I have not yet fired up my grill, and neither have any of my neighbors. It's been cold, windy, and miserable, but it's going to get better. So I do think we're going to see cash prices move up. We've been trading north of $1.40. I do think eventually we're going to see noticeably higher live cattle prices, noticeably higher cutouts. What's happening is obviously the price of feed is going up, and there's a bit of a disconnect between where we are with cattle prices and what the animal costs to feed, and what we want to watch are slaughter numbers. If slaughter numbers begin to pick up above that 122,000 a day that we usually see, start pushing north to 127, 128, that's going to lead to herd depletion. We do have a cattle on feed number on Friday, and I think the expectation is we're going to see about 9% fewer cattle on feed. So what's going to happen is you're going to see green animals come to market. Not green in color, but they're not going to be as heavy. When we get down the road, what that's going to mean is there's going to be less beef around when we start to move into the fall situation. And if we look at the feeder price curve here, the feeders are kind of reflecting that right now. And right now, May feeders are at $1.63. If we go out on this curve further, you can see feeder cattle, $1.79, $1.81 a pound. That means replacement costs are going up for the cattle along with the feeders. So that is going to create a natural bottleneck into the market. and we are going to end up, I think, by fall seeing meaningfully higher retail prices for beef. Meaningfully, and this is something that is going to be part of that consumer inflation issue, because the turnaround time on that is going to be lower. Now, Brooks mentioned something about you go to the grocery store and you make a decision about what you're actually going to buy. Are you going to buy a pork chop or are you going to buy chicken? We have bird flu. It's not becoming as big of an issue just yet, but if that continues, that can cut down the poultry supplies. So now we're going to have chicken prices that become a bit elevated and can move higher, and that can, between the beef and that, you're going to be able to drag hog prices up eventually, because it's going to become, I want a steak, I want a chicken up, and you get the pork. And we see the same thing coming on the consumer end. We're moving into a seasonally slower time for hog prices, and typically the decline. The market has been a little bit heavy here. We've seen belly prices back off, but they still remain remarkably elevated. Carcass prices have been solid, but again, more elevated. And I think given a little time to work out where we are on the demand curve, we're going to be looking at meaningfully higher hog prices as well. Anything else anybody'd like me to talk about? I can talk about this real quick. This is a chart of the NASDAQ composite. Yesterday, we had one of the most eye-popping moves I've ever seen in an individual stock that's a major, a real company. That was Netflix. Prices dropped 35% in one day. Today, we had another company come out and produced very good numbers. Another company that's growing and getting to be bigger and more important, and that was Tesla. Notice, market opened higher on that and on the good news. However, as you can see, we're backing off. And that is how a bear market exactly works. And this is the 50-day moving average. And as you can see, we failed right at it. So when this market has a problem, go back and look at the bigger equity market here. We'll look at the S&Ps. And the S&Ps right now, we're higher, but we were up 50 when we started this call. Now we're only up 28. And once again, here we're moving up against some moving averages, and we're seeing some price rejection after completing this 3-day pattern is very bullish. Failure today is going to make those computers that trade this stuff very nervous, much like what we saw right here where we had the 3-day reversal, and then, oops, as soon as it conked out, we pushed back. So we are heading into a period of increased volatility there. Part of it is money outflows. Part of it is the reopening is going to be very uneven. We don't know how all this reopening is going to work. Wall Street estimated that for Netflix, they were going to add 2 million subscribers. They lost 200,000. So they were off by 1.8 million people. How do you miss that big? But again, getting all the data and information is a little bit harder, and that will be something that will be volatile inducing across all the markets, because if you have crude or stocks, one of them get more volatile, it has a way of coming back and affecting everything from cotton to corn.
Somebody did ask how precious metals were doing.
Oh, precious metals, things that drive me nuts. Full disclosure, I do own some gold. I do own some mining stocks. Am I happy about it? I'm tolerant of it, is how I'm doing. Gold prices have been elevated. The problem with gold right now, it should be going up. By everything we know, according to the playbook, it should be going up. But we have this distraction. It's called Bitcoin. And speculative money that would be helping push gold higher is finding its way into that stuff. And I'm not even going to get started on my soapbox on that. Gold prices are continuing to elevate. If there should be a problem with crypto, and who knows where a landmine could be, that's a new animal. I think we do generally have an environment where gold can move up. And the other thing that's tied directly to gold and silver is the dollar. And this is something that, again, this is different. Most of the time when we see a commodity rally, we see the dollar go lower, sometimes meaningfully. Here's a chart of the dollar index, which, if you think about it, looks exactly like that chart of the 10-year that I put up. The dollar has been rising, which is normally a headwind for commodities, and this can create some air pockets and days of volatility. If we see a situation where the dollar finally peaks out, the Fed can't raise interest rates anymore, that will put an end to this rally. If the dollar breaks, gold is basically the anti-dollar. That could create a very interesting situation for gold, and a very interesting situation for its nasty little cousin, silver. So stay tuned in. It should be a very, very different and a very interesting summer.
Wow. Wow. Kind of feels like we're surfing a little bit, trying to figure out what the next wave is going to be.
Oh, this is the Bermuda Triangle of finance. You're flying through it. Your compass is spinning backwards. Your clock is running backwards, because it's very hard to find where the anchors and the normal things that you predicate analysis on kind of aren't there. It's a little slippery. It's a little different. So.
Wow. So that term about greasing your surfboards is very accurate right now.
Grease your surfboards and make sure your GPS works, because your compass may be a mess.
I got it. I got it. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. So I do want to thank you. Wow, this has really been just so full of information. You guys, really knocked it out of the park again. You guys are so good. Brooks did need to sneak away here, but thank you guys so much for joining us. If you do have any questions after the fact, please send those to marketinginfo@sompointernational.com. Those have been put in the chat box, and we do have those in the DMO. A recording has been made today, and it will be available on our YouTube page, and it will be in the DMO. We will have that hopefully today. It might be tomorrow though, so be watching for that. We do have an upcoming meeting in May for our WASD. We will do that live. So watch again for the registration links for that. As well
and
as
the May WASD, Christy, is the first look at next year. So that will be a bigger and a much more interesting report than what we've seen over the the more quiet spring reports.
That's important to know. First look at next year. So very important. Make sure that you join us for that. And then our May marketing meeting will be on the 19th. So just like this, but the May meeting. And just know that that is open to everybody. We want to invite you to come back for that meeting as well. I don't have anything else. Just to tell you all, hopefully we'll be in the fields. It won't be so wet. Hopefully our people in the upper Midwest will be out of the snow and not buried anymore. Thank you all again so much for being with us. Oh, I have another thing. Let me check here real quick in our chat box, make sure that we don't have another question that has shown up here real quick. Oh, just a thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you all so much for being a part of it and being here with us today. Thanks, Sterling. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Brooks. We will see you guys next month.